And then we talked about attribution in the morning, we talked about resilience, we talked about many different topics which relate to this, but this is happening, there is a real person behind this, whether it's running a botnet or it's, it's cybercrime, is absolutely a physical problem, from connecting the digital to the physical. So the next topic, we have a great set of panelists and really diverse orientation in terms of perspectives. So I will go by the panelists and let them introduce themselves, and then go and get on the topic.
Good afternoon.
Good. It should be good. No.
Oh, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, in beautiful Davos. Denise Anderson. I am the president and CEO of the Health ISAC Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and also the chair of the National Council of ISACs. So I work with all of the ISACs on a very close basis daily, practically on these things. And I consider myself an advocate for global information sharing. I was actually employee number 2 at FS-ISAC, the Financial Services ISAC, and was instrumental in building that ISAC to where it is today. I've been doing information sharing for a long time, and I think that when we're talking community, the criminals have a community, and so we need to be, we are our own worst enemy when we don't share and create our own communities for sharing good information with each other. So that's kind of my background there.
Absolutely, go on, Rod.
Thank you. My name is Rod Beckstrom. Started my career in high tech, started my first company in grad school and took it public and sold it. That was in financial risk management. And then wrote a book on decentralization and got recruited by the Director of National Intelligence, Mike McConnell in the US, to be one of his senior advisors, and I helped to author the Comprehensive National Cyber Initiative of the US government. And then I moved on to run the National Cybersecurity Center, which was a joint venture between Department of Defense, DNI, Secretary of Defense, and Attorney General. I reported all 4 of them and coordinated the NSA, FBI, CIA, and DoD cyber centers in collaboration. So I have a lot of experience in information sharing and what works and doesn't work in collaboration. Then went on to be CEO of ICANN, which is an internet coordination organization, focuses on the domain names and addresses globally and works with countries around the world and has a significant security level. So we implemented DNSSEC at that time. Anyway, and back at my Silicon Valley roots, I have a cyber consultancy. I have pieces of a couple of artificial intelligence companies, including one in the cybersecurity space, and just really honored to be here with all of you.
All right, good afternoon, Colonel Yaktarian. I've spent 24 years in the Estonian Air Force, out of those last 6 as the commander of the Air Force. Now for the last 4 months, I've had the privilege to be the director of the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, which is a think tank in Tallinn, Estonia. It's not part of NATO military structure. It is based on nations volunteering to be members, contributing with their smartest and best people. So basically anything intelligible that I say today is thanks of their knowledge rubbing off on me, and everything else is my original thought and should not be repeated by anyone.
Hi, my name is Renaud Doazon. I'm CTO and co-founder of Tenable. Tenable is a cyber exposure company. We help our customers identify and reduce the most effectively their cyber exposure. I've been in the cyber industry for over 20 years, before it was called cyber. And to bounce back a little bit on David's comment earlier, one thing I've noticed in the maturation of the industry over the last few years is the emergence of the notion of pragmatism when it comes to security. That industry has really been black or white, very extreme. Things are perfect or they're not. And what we're starting to see is kind of a reflection of, well, sometimes a shade of gray in between.
Thank you. And as I said, this is a pretty diverse panel, so we'd like to tap into the different perspectives of cyber adversaries. Let's start with you, Denise. You've been the whole information sharing, constituency, I would say, has been pioneered by you and your colleagues. So, how do you see the whole role of, we talked about attribution a little bit also. So how do you see the role of information sharing, and where do you draw the, you have also drawn boundaries and sometimes erase them. So please share your thoughts around that.
Well, I think it's really important. Obviously, you mentioned earlier that there are people behind these attacks, right? And so understanding that there are tactics, techniques, and procedures and what they're doing to go against various companies, understanding geopolitical risks, as we saw with Petya and WannaCry, not Petya, WannaCry, and understanding that even though you may not be exactly the target, you can be impacted, as we saw in those attacks. And basically being able to share with each other within the community and across communities, because we share not only within our verticals, but also across and globally, understanding what's out there, what we need to protect against, and have a good sense so that if we see something, we know immediately, okay, it's this particular threat actor, these are the typical types of techniques that they'll use in their attacks, and we can look within our own infrastructures as to what we should be guarding against or protecting against. So the more that we can share information with each other to understand what we're dealing with will help us, in fact, deal with it.
Rod, you have seen all sides, from the government side as well as from the ICANN side, where is global cooperation, and then driving that. Where do you see pinpointing adversaries go to, and a little bit in terms of attribution as well as getting identifying the people behind this?
Sure, and I'm going to actually start with a quick case study. I was at DEF CON, it was either Black Hat or DEF CON about 8 years ago, and I was talking to one of the top security researchers in Silicon Valley who was hot on the trail of a criminal network in Eastern Europe and contacted their government counterpart just to let them know, hey, I'm chasing this and I could use some help. And the government counterpart pulled out a little red stamp called top secret, stamped it on the project, and it killed the hunt. Told the person, you'll disengage, you'll not be involved, we have it from here. And it went cold and the criminals got off. And so what I want to talk about really briefly is some of the don'ts of investigation and pursuing cyber criminals. Because in public-private partnerships, each party really has to respect each other's role and maintain the trust. And the don'ts are often ignored. Most of us know what the do's are. So the do's real quickly are think decentralized, think ecosystem, think networks and partnerships. Don't think top-down hierarchy or control. It's got to be flat, very decentralized, self-organizing, like this event here today that you're contributing to. Start relationships before you need them. Invest more in forensic and investigative capabilities is essential for tracking cyber crimes. And focus on effective partnerships, which means this trust. It's very, very delicate in intense investigations. You don't want to you don't want to get too many parties involved, but you've got to have international collaboration often to have success. And you got to foster peer-to-peer relationships. Don'ts, very quickly, do not build information sharing platforms unless they're missing. Health ISAC, FS ISAC are great examples. There's the DHS platforms. Each governments have their own platform. NATO may have its own platform, but only create a new platform if they're missing. And I say this because so often when we talk about public-private partnerships, somebody talks about building a new platform. And most of those are just a complete waste of time and resources, and I'd say over 90% of the time. So just don't do it unless it's missing. Try to use existing platforms if you can. Secondly, just don't violate the private sector's trust. And don't play it asymmetrical. The private sector often feels that governments are a one-way information suck. And I've been on both sides. I mean, I'm in the private sector now, and I've worked in the government. And so the government's got to be a really fair party in the transaction. And then the last thing is never try to force information sharing. Parties know what they can share. They have an interest in sharing with the right parties at the right time to accomplish their goals. If you want to be in that information sharing flow, you better be contributing something to the network and the other parties, but never try to compel it or force it as a government or as a hierarchical authority, unless it's an absolute crisis, and that's a different discussion.
I think the compelling comes with a cost, and that's what we've learned in a very hard way, that when with the NIST 853 and the whole standards was given, was more like you take it and it's not prescriptive, and I think compilation really doesn't, whereas motivation works and incentives work. So definitely a great point. Moving on.
I was just going to say really quickly, there's a difference between thou shalt share and I want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jacques, Criminalizing, your thoughts on, I mean, you run a very unique organization. I don't know how many of them are there, but it's a think tank, and it's also developing norms and principles. and then sharing and military strategies. Where do you see, in terms of the whole cyber adversary equation, what are your thoughts? I mean, with fundamental, emphasis on the work that you're doing in CDOC.
Yeah, I used to really trust private sector, but now when Rod stole my conclusions, must have been that LinkedIn request I sent in or something. I don't know how it got. It was even on paper. I don't know how I did it, but sharing, yes. So let me try to build my way into that same conclusion. I'm fitting 3 cliches into the same sentence when I say that we live in a rapidly changing world, and the government is always one step behind, and the military is preparing for the last war. But every cliche has some truth in it, and we are guilty at those. And when you talk about sharing between private and public and government and military, well, even within military, I didn't see it with my eyes, but I heard of a story in Afghanistan of an operational commander having 7 different computers physically separated on his desk to run on 7 different networks. So it can get pretty bad even inside military. So 5 years ago, I would have denied the request to be on this panel. That's cybercrime. That's not, our steering committee of 21 member nations specifically said, stay on the strategic issues on state-on-state cybercrime. But now really the line is blurring between cybercrime and the petty criminals and states acting as criminals. Let's take, Estonians, who do we pick on Russia? The NotPetya, what they released in Ukraine to take down Ukraine, cause damage to Ukrainian economy, had big collateral damage in the world. Was it state-on-state? Kind of. Did it cause criminal damage? Yes, it did. So which is it? Is it cybercrime? Is it state action? North Korea, they already mentioned WannaCry, the Sony hacks. They fill their government budget by stealing on the internet as much as they can. Sometimes they attack a private company, Sony, if they release a film they don't like. So it's blurring the line of theft. China stealing intellectual property, especially from the defense companies. Yes, it is a cybercrime. It's absolutely attack on U.S. national and entire Western world military security as well. It seems that everyone's kind of gotten the point that cyber is very important. We have all those cyber conferences, cyber talks. Well, the internet domain that was built to connect everything, I think it has created more stovepipes than before. I think we're sharing less, or maybe there is so much information that we just can't share everything, but the stovepipes and silos, it used to be intelligence that was not shared. Now it seems cyber has taken over. Cyber guys are the ones that know, nationalize only, red stamp on it. It's bad. Well, the adversaries, the criminals, they're sharing. They don't have those bureaucratic hindrances. Yeah. After 9/11, when their finances were cracked down by a hunt for a terrorist, they figured out cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are a great way to run criminal finances. Cybercrime as a service is out there. They can share data on jurisdiction and authority of our law enforcement agencies, which we don't share amongst ourselves, to geolocate themselves physically, their data, their finances into places where there is less possibility of law enforcement agencies of getting them. So if we don't start sharing, cooperating, like you said, trying to be half a step ahead if we can, if it's possible for government, I don't know. And across all domains, interagency, within nations, and international.
Absolutely, no, great points. So we'll come to Renaud in terms of enabling the perspectives that we shared. Whether it's threats, intelligence sharing, or it's getting the government half a step ahead. Where do you see the technologists getting there? I mean, you have a long history of innovation, and how can we aid that journey?
Well, first of all, so I'll be the contrarian of this panel. Before talking about sharing, I think it's really important to realize that a lot of companies have extremely poor cyber hygiene. They don't really understand what's on their network. And before we can talk about sharing meaningful data, it's extremely important to get a grasp of the network itself. right? And really understand what's going on, what are the important assets, because then that's how you identify which assets are going to be under attack and which one need to be monitored, which it leads to a better dissociation between noise versus actual signal, right? And it's important because there is a clear asymmetry between the defenders and the attackers, right? We mentioned it multiple times this morning. It's intellectually stimulating to think that Russia or North Korea is going after my company. In practice, it can be somebody in his basement, right? And if I don't really have a good grasp of my network, if basically my basic defenses are down, then anybody can get in. So I really think that as an industry, we need to do a better job there to kind of elevate that. Now, when it comes to sharing specifically, the counterpoint to your point about like sharing with everybody is that criminals do get it as well, ultimately. Right now, I know that the ISACs are kind of fairly strict about who can get the data, but there is a known property, which is that when you have a secret, if it's shared by more than one person, it's basically leaked everywhere at some point. And attackers use this information to see if the attacks they do are being discovered, or is they remain covered, and they can also change their MO, right? So it's very important to kind of balance full disclosure of that information sharing versus who gets it.
Yeah. So I mean, taking that point forward, Denise, what works and what doesn't work? I mean, you have seen a long journey of information sharing, right? And then influenced a lot of how best practices have governed this place. So your thoughts on those lines? So
there's been a couple times, for example, in the financial sector, when we had the DDoS attacks in 2012, 2013. Actually, that was an absolutely brilliant example of public-private sharing and cooperation with each other, as well as within the financial community. And then we shared beyond that too. But the banks, I like to say, they typically tend to open the kimono to each other, and this time they opened the kimono and gave each other massages. And that makes people a little squeamish when they have that image or they think about it, but it absolutely was true. The sharing that happened there was just phenomenal. And it became so good that the attacker kept having to move on because the attacks became less efficient until eventually it dropped out. That also happened with Pecha, not Pecha, in the healthcare sector. What we did in health was amazing. I would say it's even better than finance. But the sharing that took place within 48 hours, we were able, and this was a group of probably 60 individuals from about 30 different companies within health, were able to not only verify what the actual true indicators were, what the threat vector was, and how to mitigate against it. And we developed a vaccine where we were able to show everybody, and we shared it broadly. So we didn't keep it within health or to the membership. We shared it across the globe about what you could do to help protect yourself against attacks. So absolutely, I think information sharing can mitigate against attacks and also help people protect themselves. We have a saying, one person's defense is everybody else's offense, and that's kind of the philosophy within that community. Where it doesn't work so far, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think, as I said when I opened, we are our own worst enemy when we don't want to share with each other. And there's a lot of reasons why that is the case. One could be we don't want to share with government for whatever reason. And I'm saying that from the private sector side. And then one could be that I feel intimidated by all the other guys sharing, that I may not be, they may think what I have to share is not important. So that's another, ego is another one, or lack of ego. So I think, we need to overcome all of our fears and concerns around sharing and really start to believe in it and do it in a trustworthy and effective way, so that it benefits everybody as much as possible. Like we've alluded to, and I alluded to in the beginning, the criminals do it.
Yep.
So we should be doing it too.
Somebody's already said the best practices now, right? Your thoughts on Rod again? There is a sharing aspect, and then there is a governing aspect, also policy aspect, right? I mean, you have seen the world of this from long term. Like, where do you see this going in terms of the policy governance around this sharing?
Sure. And I'm going to relate to a thought I actually had just listening to your comments and the other panelists, which is and I had a discussion earlier with someone, I think y'all or someone here, is that overall, I'm going to make an argument as an economist that there's no breakdown in the information sharing market. I mean, there's rich markets. They take place in many different forms. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of companies making lots of money on information sharing, including what we'd call software providers now, and service providers are really selling information. And so it's useful to think about that financial marketplace. But what I'm thinking about right now is that overlaid on that is a trust marketplace. And there's even places where you're exchanging the information without explicit financial value, such as in the ISACs, which are extremely successful and value information sharing platforms, which of course are governed by their industry members, which builds more trust. But if you begin to think of the sharing, because I've always thought of it kind of a peer-to-peer sense, and you decide which, as an agent, as a company or an individual or a research analyst or a firm, you're choosing which information sharing networks to engage in. Where do you need the information? What can you afford? And what can you give? And with all due respect to FS-ISAC, that I think the world of, there's an elite group of banks in New York City that only share information with each other first, okay? And then they decide whether those 7 or whatever the number is today share it with FS-ISAC. And that's fine. I think that's appropriate, because the reality is each of those tier 1 players is spending probably several $100 million a year at least, up to $1 billion, as we know, per annum just on cybersecurity. They're in an elite club. They have information security controls around what they're doing. They have people with very high levels of experience and clearances. So I'm not going to say that's a problem with the market. I'm going to call that a market efficiency. But so I want to think about these networks of information sharing, both in terms of the financial markets and then also trust-based market. And then I think trust is, of course, a very interesting topic to open up into. I tend to think that on a transactional basis. I don't think of it on an ethical or a moral basis or a judgmental basis. And what does that mean? What it means is the way I analyze the trust of a party is what transactions are they willing to do with a different given party. There's someone different that I will trust to, manage my kids' money or manage my money, okay, is a different person than I will want as a babysitter, for someone's children, is different than the life insurance company or cyber insurance company I want, but that you really reflect your transaction, your trust in the transactions you take. So, do I trust eBay? I buy tons of stuff on eBay. Do I trust the parties? Well, I make an assessment, right? And I spend a lot on eBay every year. I lose very little, so it's a risk management game. And so do I trust everyone on eBay? Absolutely not. Same thing, information sharing. So back to it. You've got a market-based system that's going, all the companies trying to make money. You've got open platforms, but you have to pay to play too. You got to be a member in many cases to get your information. So there's a price tag there. So anyway, so that's how I'm thinking about it. It's and for the individual company or entities, you got to figure out what is the threat, right? What's a key threat to you? What is the data that you need to operate and to get your cyber level up next to protect your core assets?
So I think the bottom line is trust and transactional value and what it means to you. So absolutely. Taking this forward, Jacques, you mentioned about the lines being blurred between the government and private, from the public side and the private side. Why do you see your role from the military side and also thinking about sharing information within the board or advisory team that you got? Where does it go from that to what you share with the world? I mean, in terms of the norms and principles.
Well, specifically the CCD-COE, we do very little classified stuff. We are unclassified research entity. We train and educate as well in addition to the research. So when we started out in 2008. CCD-COE was kind of a big player in military cyber, with 30 people, 30 researchers. Now we're grown, double in size. We're 15.9, the last I counted, growing. That's a small player in cyber. So we really rely on cooperation with national academia, government, military, any sector in order to share their knowledge. One good example is the Tally manual. At least the lawyers in this have seen it. The first one and the 2.0. Really, any nation with a large enough academia could have created Tally manual. U.S., UK, Germany, and anybody. have enough professors to write about it, and then the rest of the world would say, so what? It's your national view. Why do we care? The value of international, fairly neutral body creating this is that it is more acceptable to the international community as a neutral document analyzing the applicability of the existing international law on the cyber domain. So that's an example of sharing, what we do. We had several authors from outside. It was actually mostly the authors were from outside the center.
When it's outside, it's outside. It's not the
not the member nation, not even the members, our own researchers. The Tally Manual 2.0 had dissenting articles from Chinese and Belarusian, amongst others.
So you can say fairly neutral.
Yeah, it's really truly balanced and neutral. Yeah. So
excellent. So taking this forward. The contrarian on the panel, do you see in terms of the information sharing best practices and the governing mechanisms and the blurring lines of sharing between the from a military cooperation body to an outside world, is technology the glue between all this, and bad guys use it and we need to use it better?
Well, technology can help make better use of the information which is shared, but what you have to keep in mind is that the security industry has always been an industry which has been looking for a silver bullet. It was the antivirus, and then the firewall would solve every problem, then the intrusion detection system, and then the intrusion prevention system, because why detect if you can prevent? And now it's endpoint protection and whatnot, and maybe machine learning. And I see how shared information coming from multiple platforms, whether it's the ISACs, whether it's from commercial vendors doing threat intelligence and whatnot, could basically enable these tools to work in a better way. But we should not, it should not be another kind of silver bullet, another attempt at a silver bullet, when a lot of the basic foundational work has not been done yet, right? We talked this morning a little bit about the investment in cyber, right? The quantity and whatnot. It's not about the quantity, it's the quality, right? It's not just piling on technology, it's enabling it in the entire pipeline of the development of a project. It's making sure that it's making sure that cyber is not the last mile, it's the underlying platform. And once we have all that, then in my mind, sure, we can enable that whole kind of ecosystem with the information from threat chain platforms.
Excellent. So with that, we'll go back to the audience. Any questions? We have time for a couple of questions. Hey, Laura has a question here.
I want to add a comment. You see in this room, the Freedom on the Net studies, and Estonia is always ranked as #1. And so there's a distinction Estonia has in technology and in cyber, in a culture that starts at a young age. Was it Leaped In or Tiger Leap that Tuomas Ilves, you might have been educated, you may be too young to have been educated in that program, that they taught coding from such a young age. I think it'd be interesting if you added sort of the cultural aspect that is in here that has enhanced Estonia to hold the position it's in.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I'm not that young, so. I graduated high school in '92, and I think Tiger Leap actually started after that. So yeah, I did take some coding in high school, and then before that, I was a computer nerd when it was. I remember Yamaha computers. There was one class per Tallinn in the late '80s. Yamaha doesn't make computers anymore for a long time. I think it really helped starting from the scratch. Not many legacy systems. For example, I left Estonia in '94, and it was still kind of a cash-based economy. I left for 4 years in the U.S. Air Force Academy, and I got my checkbook there and learned to balance it, and in a bank. And when I came back, in '98, I opened a bank account in Estonia, and I asked, "So, where is my checkbook?" They said, "Checkbook. Here's your codes for internet banking." And I'm like, "Internet banking? What's happened? What is that?" So the leap of not having legacy technologies or legacy mindset in people, nobody in Estonia knows what a written check is. We skipped that. So that's just one example of starting country from the scratch, what do? You don't have enough people to run big bureaucracies. You don't have money to pay them. You try to automize. Automize, is that the English word? Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so and having leaders with vision like Thomas Silva's helped as well. So I don't think there is one single factor, but just good people and.
The mandatory multi-factor for all citizens authentication.
Yes, the base of current Estonian e-governance is the national mandatory ID card, which I understand is politically unacceptable in some countries. But for us, without that, you can't run e-governance if you don't have mandatory ID card. But yeah, it's kind of easy. Everybody's already bored of hearing about elections online and filing your taxes online and all those things. But it doesn't make things easy. I just last week got an email that, hey, your driver's license is about to expire. So I log onto the system and I apply for renewal, and now I get email. I still need to go and physically get it. They don't send it in mail. It's the paper mail is considered non-secure in Estonia. We don't send documents on.
Unlike other places,
the envelope
yes.
mail. Yeah. So I need to go physically pick it up.
Okay, great. We have another question, Mike.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring cloud into the room. And specifically, since we're talking about attackers and adversary attribution, how do you guys see, especially the folks involved in information sharing, as we move to an environment where we have fewer controls? You know, Renaud, you were talking about seeing what's on your network, but if it's not your network anymore and the assets are somewhere else, how do we fill those gaps in information sharing from where you guys sit?
Good question. Anybody could take, yeah. This is.
I'll take a stab. I mean, obviously, we've had, when I ran ICANN and after I left, one of the problems in looking at the cyber defenses and looking at intrusions was I used to worry about zombies and bots being machines, and all of a sudden, you've got millions of cloud instances getting spun up on free trails for short periods of time used for hacking. And you're talking about tens of, enormous numbers. And so, every time we have a new technology, we have a new sort of attack vector and a new attack surface. And I don't know what the answer is. What I'll say is, just to make it worse, we now have artificial intelligence. And big investments are being made both on the defensive side, where we can use AI to much better detect, for example, automated attacks and getting the smelling whether the user is a real user or a non-user. That's really the whole edge of the technology there right now. But AI is also going to start being used to spoof more automatically and generate all sorts of new attacks and leverage the cloud. So, yeah, it's getting harder. It's not simpler. The good news is, lifetime employment for all of us in the room, both in government.
Until the robots and the automation picks it up, and right. But still, there is. Okay. We have time for one last question. Anybody? Okay, yeah, Dave, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is a question I could have asked all of the groups and would love to hear all the answers, but I think this group is uniquely seated or in a position for this. 5G, as we look at the enhancements and new technologies coming about, we get excited about the opportunities and the economic values and the enhancements to our lives, and we're often playing catch up on the defense side and on the cybersecurity side, which we've historically found ourselves in. What are we facing from a threat perspective in the 5G world, and are we preparing for those events now?
I can take a stab, and if you guys want to complete. One of the key things with 5G that is very often overlooked is the fact that each tower can support many more devices. And so in a world of enterprise IoT or enterprise-ish IoT, what you're talking about in the future is each device doesn't connect to the corporate network. It has its own kind of SIM card and goes directly to the cloud, and you manage it from there. So on one hand, it's an opportunity because that means, today the scourge of a lot of enterprises is IoT, right? Or what we call home IoT finding its way in the enterprise, such as like a smart TV, something like that, which is using a projector and also connects to the local network. So that goes away. The downside of that is now you have a myriad of devices in the enterprise, kind of monitoring people, listening to conversations, and it's extremely difficult to keep track of them. We already have this problem today when they're part of the network you can monitor. So that's, to me, it's going to create more chaos, but I know on the home front it's easier. and it might also solve other problems.
Okay, great. So we have time for some closing thoughts on this. I know we have discussed a variety of aspects from the sharing part and to the policy governance, the military lines. So closing thoughts from right now. Maybe we start from you.
Yeah. So again, I think going after the attacker is interesting. There will always be attackers, and of all shapes and sizes, and it should not deter, or it should not distract from the pain of maintaining a good level of cyber hygiene within the enterprise. Right? Again, cyber hygiene is not a sexy topic. It's hard work. It requires cooperation with a lot of different business units. But it's a key thing. And once this is done, then going after some of the most persistent attackers is something to do.
So, Jacques, your point?
Well, since this is a panel about cyber criminals, then if you want the cyber criminals to be brought to justice, then you need to make sure that those bringing them to justice have the right authority, jurisdiction, equipment, manning, training, budget, and information.
Here, one thing I just share a really super quick case study. When I was CEO of ICANN, we had a lot of U.S. law enforcement involvement when I first came, and I noted the need for international. So I went to Interpol and met with the head of Interpol and said, we really want to partner with you because you have a relationship with law enforcement in every country in the world. Even though cyber was not their focus area, they were trying to move into it. But what they did have was an outstanding operations center and crisis management center there in Lyon. And we built a relationship in general, and it was only months later when Anonymous threatened Operation Global Blackout to shut down the global internet on February 12th of 2012. And Interpol became our partner in Europe, providing the operations center that we brought all the private sector and everyone into. So it ended up being a win-win for us and them. We had a fantastic facility and them as a convening power, and then they had the benefit of us and us being in the middle of the network and all the relationships bringing the parties to them in Europe. So you want to, again, follow the do's and let's skip the don'ts just so we save a lot of energy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of consistent themes so far today, and I think they're applicable here in that, enterprise risk management, knowing what your crown jewels are and what you can lose and what you can't lose for how long. Knowing who the threat actors are and their motivations is a piece of that, right? So it's helping you to understand how you can protect yourself against that. And I think that's, the more we can share with each other what the things we are that we learn from the various incidents or as we explore out into new innovations, I think will only make us better. And I always like to quote at the end, my Pink Floyd is that together we stand, divided we fall, so.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great note on thinking in terms of how we can counter the adversaries. So this has been a great panel. Thank you so much. It's a great topic. So round of applause, please. Thank you.